Hey, welcome back, Casibang's crew. This is our first video in Unit 4, the biological basis of behavior. And we are going to start with the neuron. And we start with the neuron because our neurons are basic building blocks of everything that we're going to talk about in biology. Basic building blocks of our nervous system, of our brain. We have about 86 billion neurons in our brain alone. So there are a lot of them. So we do need to start there. So let's take a look at our objectives for this particular lesson. These are also on your Unit 4 unit guide. So first, we're going to identify the basic processes and systems in the biological basis of behavior, including parts of the neuron. And then we are going to identify basic processes of transmission of a signal between neurons, so how they communicate. So we are going to start by diagramming a neuron. So there are two really important things that you need to be able to do here. You have to be able to look at this neuron and tell me what all of the parts are. And you also need to be able to tell me what these parts do in the neuron. So let's diagram this together. You have this on your video notes as well. So the first part are these sort of branchy looking protrusions off the end of this neuron. And these are called dendrites. And the dendrites receive incoming messages from all of these other neurons. The next part is this kind of circular part right in the middle here of the dendrites. And that is the cell body for our neuron. It is sometimes known as the soma. Please make sure that you know both of those words because sometimes it could show up on a test either way. So the cell body is the cell's life support center. Next, we're going to take a look at this green arrow that we have drawn here, this green arrow. And this shows you the direction of our neural impulse or the electrical signal or the action potential, which is the message that the neuron is sending. More on that in a little bit. Next, we have this very long singular, kind of looks like a thread almost. Okay, that is our axon. The axon is the longest part of the neuron, and it is what that electrical message travels down from. So it comes in this dendrites, and it's going to travel all the way down this axon to the end here. On the axon, we have these little kind of round, they kind of look like marshmallows almost. These are called myelin sheath, and these are insulators, little fatty tissue that insulates the axon. And what happens there is it allows that message to speed up. It allows that message to go very, very fast. And most of these messages are going really, really fast already anyway, but the myelin sheath helps with that. And then the last thing down here at the bottom are the axon terminal buds. And this is the end point of our neuron. And it's here where neurotransmitters are released. More on that in the next video. But neurotransmitters are released and then the message is sent on to the very next neuron. So we have, I said, 86 billion neurons. So they're not all sending messages at the same time, okay? If you think of a big train, okay? If you think of a train on a train track, you would have to get a message all the way from that end caboose, and it would have to travel one by one through the cars of the train to get all the way to the engine of the train. And that's similar to how this happens in a neuron. So sometimes neurons are just kind of hanging out. They're just resting. They're just waiting for the message to be sent. And that is called resting potential. So when the neuron is not firing, when there is not a message being sent, they're just waiting for a message, it's called resting potential. And there's a couple things that are happening within the neuron during this resting potential. So this little rectangular box right here, this is the axon of the neuron, okay? The axon of the neuron. So when it's in its resting state, it has these sodium ions out here, okay? This Na+, these are sodium ions. and it has these potassium ions on the inside. Okay, so inside is potassium, outside is sodium. Easiest way to remember this, because you do need to remember that those two chemicals, I always say salty bananas, because sodium is salt, right? And potassium is found in bananas. So that's the mnemonic device that I always use to help me remember what those two chemicals are that are happening in the neuron. Okay, salty bananas. Oh, did I miss something? Okay, there we go. All right, so during resting, the neuron is polarized. Okay, so polarized. Here, if you think the North Pole and the South Pole, okay, they are opposite each other. So they're polarized, so the opposites are away from each other. Okay, our opposites are the sodium being positive on the outside and potassium being negative on the inside. So polarization at resting potential, when sodium is on the outside, potassium is on the inside of the neuron. Okay, so polarized. At this state, our neuron is in what is known as homeostasis. Okay, homeostasis is our normal state. And we are always in our body trying to maintain homeostasis. We're always trying to maintain our normal state. So action potential, okay? Like I said, when we diagrammed the neuron, this is the nerve impulse or the electrical pulse or the message that travels the length of the axon. And remember, I said it goes from the dendrites down the axon and to the axon terminal buds. It's important that you remember the direction that this message is traveling. So when the neuron receives a message and it decides to fire, it uses this principle called all or nothing principle, which is exactly what it sounds like. It either fires completely, all, or it doesn't fire at all. Okay, so all or nothing. There isn't like just a small firing or a halfway or a little bit. It fires completely or it doesn't fire at all. And it does maintain the same intensity, the strength or the power of the message at the entire length of the axon. Now, I am going to pause this for a second, and I want you to just think about what we've talked about with the axon, just based on what you know so far. And I want you to just kind of compare it to how a toilet flushes, okay? Compare the action potential and the neuron firing to how a toilet flushes. All right, so now we're going to talk about depolarization. Okay, so when those opposites that are away from each other, they're no longer away from each other. And this happens when that action potential, when that electrical signal comes into the axon. Okay, so it is a domino effect. Have you ever set up dominoes and then you hit one and then they hit each other and it just creates this whole thread of dominoes being knocked over? This is how the neuron fires. It's similar to a domino. Okay, so here we have it, where we've got our sodium ions on the outside and we have our potassium ions on the inside. And now we're going to see how this sodium ions rush in, okay, to this open gate, okay? And then the potassium ions are like, oh, wait, no, I don't want to be near the sodium. I don't like this at all. I got to get out of here. So then our potassium ions go out. Okay. So in effect, they switch places. Okay. All of the sodium ions rush into the middle of the axon and all of those potassium ions rush out. Okay. They don't like to be mixed together, positive and negative. They don't like it. Okay, so they seek opposite. Then there's a short period of time after that axon fires that the neuron is just focused on resetting, going back to homeostasis. Remember, that's how we want to be. So it doesn't fire, okay? It's just kind of stuck in like a resting, resetting kind of period. So then the potassium, okay, feels good about going back in. Okay, so again, our potassium goes back into our axon. And then the sodium goes back out. Okay, so take another second. I'm going to pause the video, and then I want you to keep going with our toilet flushing analogy. Okay, how is this refractory period similar in the process of flushing our toilet? All right, so let's review this again, okay? Action potential can be a little bit tough. We're going to review it again. Here's the diagram all together. So right up here at the top, this is our nerve, okay? The message is coming in, all right? So here's a very small part of the axon. Look at our arrow. It's going here. Okay, this is a small part of our axon that we've just kind of made larger, okay? So our signal is coming in. See, our signal is coming in. It came in through the dendrites and it's traveling down the axon. And those sodium channels open up and the sodium ions rush in. And then our potassium ions say, wait, no, I don't want to mix with you. So they decide that they are going to rush out. Okay, so now we have sodium inside, potassium on the outside. That first sodium channel closes, okay, and it's in that refractory period, but our stimulus, our message is traveling down the axon. So even though this one closes, it opens up our next gate. Okay, and that's why we have that process of like dominoes. The entire axon doesn't fire at the same time. It fires in small pieces, okay, in small pieces. All right, then we get to the end. We get to those axon terminal buds at the end. And this is an enlarged version of just one of those single buds. Okay, so here's our action potential coming down the axon. If you just sort of drew this out, okay, you would see that this is an axon right here. So our action potential is coming in. And then we have a lot of stuff that happens in here. Our electrical message turns into a chemical message at this point. And the chemicals that we're going to talk about are neurotransmitters. And these are things that our body produces on its own. So these chemical messengers get excited when that electricity hits them down here in this bud. And it helps to release and cross the synapse to be able to carry the message on to the next neuron. So here are the neurotransmitters, these little dots in here. Okay, this open space is called a synapse, and this is the open space between two neurons. These neurons don't really touch. They're super, super close to each other, but they don't really touch. Okay, and then this one on the bottom is our receiving neuron. So it's the dendrite of our receiving neuron. Okay, so on the dendrite of the receiving neuron, we have kind of shapes in here, think like puzzle pieces. Okay, shapes that receive those neurotransmitters that are being dumped into that synapse, okay, and they're received by the dendrites, and then it's turned back from a chemical back into an electrical message. It's pretty cool. The synapse is a gap. Again, it's just an open space. It's not really considered to be part of the firing process because it's not actually attached to the neuron. It is the space between the neurons. All right, so that is it for the neuron. We are going to play a little bit more, make sure that you practice being able to label all of the parts and know what all of the parts do in the neuron in class tomorrow. Make sure you bring your questions. Bye-bye.